When you think about things as a practicing physician that you don't enjoy doing, probably things like charting or taking call start to come to the top of your list. When you think about other things in life you don't enjoy doing, it's probably waiting at the DMV or having a root canal performed. And within this family of things that most people seek to avoid, it's picking or choosing or really making changes to their existing workplace benefits. For physicians, picking benefits can be tricky because you're often trying to make sure the decisions that you make within the workplace confines of your retirement or insurance plans complements what you're doing outside of work with other investments or insurance coverage or things like that that you might already have. And the reality of a lot of this is it's very custom to each individual doctor's needs and the needs specifically of their family as to how they should choose or make selections when it comes to open enrollment periods for choosing workplace benefits. With that in mind, this video focuses to accomplish a couple things. Number one, in 5 minutes, I can't possibly cover every single thing you need to know about workplace benefits that you might choose for you specifically. And so number two, a lot of what we'll kind of talk through in the next 5 to 6 minutes really is focused around more of a framework or methodology you can employ when going about choosing benefits in general. So today, again, a quick 5 minutes on just benefit selection in general. And I think for most physicians, the biggest questions that come up around how much or what should I be doing on these specific scenarios comes to number one, workplace retirement plans. Things like 403Bs, 401Ks, 401As, 457Bs, and or profit sharing plans. And generally as well, insurance questions, specifically life insurance, disability insurance, and health insurance. And I alluded to this earlier, but a lot of the reasons that some of these can get tricky is because physicians tend to fall into a few general categories or kind of common themes among them. Number one, they're typically high income earners. Your tax brackets are in the 35, maybe even 37% bracket that you fall into on some of your earnings. And so the question is, how can I save on taxes today and over my lifetime as well? Workplace retirement plans can be a really good way to go about saving on taxes while simultaneously building wealth. So to start, I think it's helpful to talk through workplace retirement plans specifically, the methodology that you can employ when deciding how much to contribute to those, in what form you make contributions to workplace retirement plans, and also how you generally might think about investing those plans as well. So to start, as a physician, it's not uncommon for your income to range anywhere from $3 to $7 or $800,000 or total compensation that you bring home each year. So with that, obviously, comes the enviable problem of paying a lot of money in taxes each year. And so the question I think a lot of physicians first face is, how should I contribute to whatever retirement plan options I have available to me? Should I make a traditional or pre-tax contribution? Or should I go as with a what we call a Roth contribution, like a Roth 401k or 403b or something like that? So the question is, how do I contribute to these? Well, first, if you are in some of those really high tax brackets, pre-tax contributions can start to make a lot of sense because you get a bit effectively, not a technical tax deduction, but effectively a tax deduction. That being said, if you are in a low income tax year, a low income year for whatever reason, maybe you're switching jobs, you took a sabbatical, you switched from working full-time to part-time, whatever the situation might be, those kinds of scenarios start to lend themselves more towards Roth contributions to a 401k. And it almost goes without saying, but if you are a resident or fellow or your income is much lower than the ranges I described, it very commonly makes sense to contribute to a Roth 401k in that instance. You're probably in a much lower income or lower tax bracket than you will be, say, as an attending. When it comes to actually investing these types of accounts, certain accounts, maybe your 401a or something like that, you don't have a choice on it. The hospital or your practice invests it for you, or profit sharing plan, that's very common. For different types of accounts like 403bs or 401ks where you have investment selections to make, typically the plan is going to have a lineup of different funds that you can utilize. Looking within those and trying to build a diversified portfolio, I think, is helpful. You're ideally mitigating risk by not being over-concentrated in any one asset class. Simultaneously with that, my suggestion would be to try to avoid funds that have really high expense ratios. Certain actively managed mutual funds or even some exchange-traded funds can have expense ratios or like the percentage of the assets that you hold in that investment that they charge you as a fee each year for holding the asset. And so anything in excess, typically of 0.5%, tends to be a higher fee, in my opinion. and is likely something that's going to be worthwhile avoiding in general. So that is the auctioneer version of investing workplace retirement plans for physicians. Again, if you have questions on this is literally what we help docs navigate every fall in tandem with other kind of financial planning elements that are very common in their lives in general. Speaking of common financial planning elements for doctors, the big question I often get for doctors, specifically around navigating benefits, comes to insurance. And I mentioned this earlier, but it basically boils down to life insurance, disability insurance, and health insurance. For life insurance in general, what I often find is that, especially at large hospitals, they may offer pretty decent life insurance coverage for an individual physician that if they pass away suddenly, maybe they get a set $500,000 or 1 times their salary or something comparable to that. What I think is important to keep in mind, though, is that it is very often that coverage is not adequate for a physician who has, again, foregone a decade of earnings to now be making, let's say, $500,000 a year, to then hypothetically pass away at 40 or 50 and then leave their spouse with an inadequate sum of money, essentially, to live off of. So I think the major caveat is looking at your benefits, seeing how much the max they provide for you in the event that you were to suddenly pass away, and then determining what is kind of like a supplementary amount I need in tandem with that coverage through work to basically provide for my family or my spouse or whatever kind of your unique situation might be. The added caveat for life insurance through work and also disability as well is that since you are not paying the premiums on those policies, in the event that you need to collect on them, or your spouse or family member needs to collect on them, that's taxable typically to them in some capacity. And so a $500,000 benefit might not actually be $500,000 netted to your dependent or your beneficiary that receives that benefit. So that's an important factor to keep in mind as well. And it's when we look at the blend of workplace versus personal life insurance policies that doctors take out, often we're kind of balancing between those two to determine what is an appropriate amount of coverage so that we're not oversold on insurance, but also kind of like what would be an appropriate amount for you specifically in your specific financial situation. This is kind of outside the scope, but as you look at personal policies, very simply, cheap term insurance from a good carrier is a great way to go on that. Second within kind of this insurance discussion is disability insurance. And I find that disability insurance for physicians actually gets a little more complicated than life insurance. The reason being that a lot of hospitals will provide some amount of short and or long-term disability coverage, but at the end of the day, it's often limited in the amount that it will provide, i.e. the benefit it might provide to you or pay out to you. And it's also limited sometimes in the capacity or time frames in which it will do that. So let's say hypothetically you become disabled and can't do whatever your specialty is for some period of time. Maybe you start collecting on a long-term disability insurance coverage through work, but you are potentially capped at some dollar amount that is maybe even lower than the paycheck you get every 2 weeks currently. The added element of disability insurance through work that I alluded to this earlier, but it's taxable to you. You're not paying the premiums, so it's kind of like if I look at the benefit sheet and say, oh, it's $20,000 per month potentially I could get or collect in the event of a disability. Well, that's taxable to you. It's $20,000 per month is taxable income, so the net amount you receive is lower than that when you think about kind of, obviously the taxes you pay on your current paycheck right now. So what I often find is that you'll want coverage through work and also some sort of personal policy to kind of supplement whatever that amount might be. Personal policies, you're paying the premiums, that income or that disability you collect on those policies is not typically taxable to you. And so it's kind of finding that balancing act, similar to what we do with life insurance, to determine what is an appropriate amount of coverage for you. The added wrinkle, I think, for disability specifically is looking at what type of coverage does the policy provide through work and for what time period does it. I've seen where a policy might have what's called own occupation coverage, to where if you're a hand surgeon and become disabled and you can't operate, maybe you lose the function of your hands and your ability to operate. Maybe you're paid out on that policy for 2 years as someone in your own occupation, but then maybe after 2 years it drops down to lower coverage amount, like in any occupation, or some sort of lower grade of occupation, if you will. Like maybe you're paid out as someone who maybe is for whatever specialty is just generally tends to be paid lower for whatever reason. Maybe even it's just any occupation where it could be someone who works in a different occupation entirely. So I say all of this just to be mindful of it and make sure that your disability coverage through work is adequate for you, that it meets whatever the needs you might have, that you're just cognizant of whatever the limitations are within it, and that you have personal coverage to kind of supplement whatever you have through work or shortcomings you might have through work in general. Okay, the last insurance element I typically discuss with docs is just health insurance in general. The reason it comes up is because it's actually kind of like a means to an end. I really like high deductible healthcare plans for a lot of doctors. Not necessarily all, but certainly I tend to encourage physicians to at least think about going that route because of a couple reasons. Number one, they typically have the cash flow to justify if you have a family deductible maybe of $5,000. You know, if you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars each year and you have to pay up to that deductible potentially for your family, you know, you can justify or meet whatever that cash flow need is. Secondly, and more importantly, being enrolled in a high deductible healthcare plan opens the door to funding and investing a health savings account. But basically, a health savings account is one of the most tax advantaged accounts that exists out there, especially for doctors. I think it's beneficial. It saves you potentially some money in taxes today and in the future as well. And really, ultimately, can just be really beneficial as a kind of a cohesive tax plan for doctors in general over the long term. The major caveat to all of what I've just said, or a high deductible healthcare plan, is that potentially a PPO, or preferred provider organization plan, can be more beneficial if you have certain health needs that you know are going to be really, really expensive. I would even omit things like the birth of a child, but things like maybe ongoing physical therapy that you'll need like a session, 2 to 3 sessions each week for the entire year. A PPO might be a better fit in that instance because of the need for kind of ongoing care that is maybe not going to be covered by a high deductible healthcare plan, maybe once you even hit your deductible. Things also too, like maybe dialysis, or for maybe diabetics, certainly a PPO might be something that's worth more considering. But I do think by and large, high deductible healthcare plans get a bad rap just for people think, oh, well, a high deductible plan, I might pay out $5,000. But when you think about it in tandem with the tax savings you get from having the HSA and really the longer term benefit of investing that account, often can beat out a PPO in a lot of instances. That is, again, my auctioneer's voice on navigating physician benefits this fall. And I think the major element to keep in mind through all of this is that if you're watching this video and giving this some thought, kudos to you. Obviously, you're making the right choice and starting to take the time to kind of think through ways to be both efficient and effective in navigating my benefits to make sure that they're working for me in the largest capacity that they can. My name is Scott Sturgeon. I'm the Senior Wealth Advisor and actually the founder of Oriad Wealth Partners. We work specifically with physicians. It's kind of our wheelhouse in navigating things like benefits, insurance with and outside of work. Investing obviously is a big component of that, but really just helping them at the end of the day align their finances with what's important in their life. My cliche saying is if there's a dollar involved, we want to be involved. If any of this has kind of resounded with you, or if again, benefits gives you heartburn for whatever reason each year, or you're not really sure if you're maximizing the things that are available to you, 2 ways I would suggest reaching out, well, really 3. Number 1, we put out a newsletter every 2 weeks. It's called Views from the Top. It covers a variety of different content and topics. Secondly, you can reach out directly at info@oriadwealth.com. We can certainly answer questions that you might have or help guide generally in navigating certain issues you might be dealing with. Lastly, if any of this is kind of resounded with you, or you're intrigued at learning more about what we do and what an engagement might look like, there's a link in the description below to schedule 30 minutes with me directly. We'll just specifically kind of talk about you, what you're looking for in working with an advisor, and really whether working with Oriad Wealth could bring value to your unique situation and hopefully kind of get you on a path that leaves some peace of mind and really kind of just improves efficiency over time. So with that, again, I'm Scott Sturgeon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.